tonight's speakers, plural. Sveta Kelman, Arnie Mauser, and Keith Stevens. I did not want to bore you with the long reading the bios thing. Everybody hates it when I do that. So I'll let them introduce themselves. Besides, you can Google them, right? So I need to make sure my camera's still working. So now everybody needs to say, I'm bored, and you guys look even worse, okay? So everybody just, there we go. So now I'm done. And thank you all for coming, and thank you for being patient with the chaos of making sure there's seats and so on, all right? Thanks. And please hold your questions till they're done.
Testing. Is it working? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now let's make sure we can actually bring the slides that we need here.
Yes.
Okay. Still there. Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you. I'm just going to repeat thank you for being here, and thank you for dealing with being in a small room. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a larger room. Thank you for being here late in the day. It's great to see so much interest in Google Translate. Really quickly about myself, so I'm Sveta Kelman. Some people call me Svetlana, which is also right. I myself have background in translation and localization and spent several years on Google localization team. I worked with language service providers, with translators, reviewers in the past, and I actually have a degree in translation in Scandinavian languages. I have Keith and Arne here with me today, so they're in different sides of the room. They represent our engineering team. Arne is working on adding new languages to Google Translate, and Keith is our crowdsourcing guru, and we'll talk more about that later. Let me ask you, do we have anyone in the room who has never used Google Translate? No. Ah. Do we have anyone in the room who uses Google Translate pretty much every day? Okay, so we have some power users. Awesome. So hopefully there will be something new for both who don't use it on a daily basis and for people who use it on a daily basis. I'm going to talk briefly about how Google Translate works, just general overview, and we'll talk more about our crowdsourcing efforts and about things we're trying to improve machine translation quality. And then we'll have Q&A in the end. Let's see if I can make it go to the next slide. Yes. OK, Google mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. And universally is the key word here. So obviously we have the world's best search engine. So we think, and we hope you think so as well. And we need to make sure that anyone on the globe can actually read and understand the information that's scrolled by Google. So what did Google do? Google built machine translation, Google Translate. How much of internet content do you think is in English? What's the percentage of English pages on the web? Does anyone have a guess? 90%? OK. Any? 40? 40? Yeah, that's pretty close. I think depending on how you count, it's actually between 30 to 50% of the web content that's in English. Hold on, sorry. Next slide. There we are. So this is, here you can see the distribution of languages on the web. So English, as we just said, it's about 30, 40, 50%, however you count. And then the rest, it's followed by Chinese, Russian, German, and these other languages. So in reality, a lot of people can't really understand the content that's out there on the web. Being Google, we like solving really complex problems at scale. So does anyone know what this is? Yes, Google Data Center. These colors are not, these chairs are not made out of this, or the Google bikes that you've seen outside, they're the same colors, but they're not made out of this. So what What is this in this data center? Do you guys know? Yeah, it's a very cool cooling system. So we have so many machines in the data center that it gets really, really hot in there. I've been in one of those. It is impressive, and it's massive. So the scale at Google is a big thing. And again, being Google, we want to take a human task, teach machines to perform it, and come up with a product. And we're able to do this because we have scale. So what does it mean in terms of machine translation? We mine a lot of data on the web. We find a lot of parallel data in different documents. So you'll see here, basically, we find one document on the web in one language, and then we will try to find a different document that's a translation of this first document, and we will align and we'll find patterns. So basically, we learn from these patterns. And we use lots of web data. As I said, we use third-party data, so dictionaries that we may license. We use, does anyone know do you think what other sources can we use to teach machine translation? Wikipedia. So that's web content, right, in different languages, right? What kind of other sites do you think are there, or any other sources? The UN, right. The UN documents, user feedback. Well, that's probably not translated, right? So the user feedback will be in one language. Right, so we'll get there, exactly. If those are translated, but they're spoken, right? The subtitles, yes, that could be another source, yes. So there are lots and lots of different sources that we can use. So what ends up happening? We get a lot of data. We get a lot of human translations. May not be the exact copy, right, the exact translations, and we end up with having a lot of noisy data in our system. Or for some languages, we just don't find enough parallel data, and we kind of scramble to translate with having very limited amount of data. What do you guys use Google Translate for? Do we have, so those power users are not necessarily power users. What do you use Translate for? Or do you think others use Translate for? That's, how do you do that? You're using Google Chrome browser, yes.
Just to repeat, he said, you read Chinese newspapers.
Anything else? Yes? Right. So do you also use Google Chrome, the browser translation? Okay. So that's a lot of the web content translation.
To look at government sites for regulations.
Yeah, I wasn't going to ask why.
I'm going to repeat them for the recording, that's all.
Yes.
To make translations available when there's no budget to translate.
Ooh, to make translations available when there's no budget to translate.
Yes, good. Okay, yes? Yes, that's a good one, too. I'm going to have a slide on that, too. Yes, Alina? Cool. So you back translate, basically. Yeah. Okay, cool. So these are all very good use cases. We're going to talk about some other ones. So basically, our mission, Google Translate mission, is provide translation when and where you need it. So as several of you mentioned, finding information and understanding it is a big one. The web is in all these different languages. Maybe you're traveling somewhere, you want to understand what it is you're seeing. Speaking of understanding what language, so imagine you browse the web and you end up on the page that looks like this. Does anyone want to risk to guess what language that is? Georgian, right. I have to say that our Google Translate engineers did not recognize. But we do have, as several of you mentioned also, we do have a Chrome extension or Chrome built-in bar that will, so if you end up on that page, Google Translate will quickly determine that it's Georgian and will offer you to translate this page. And then it looks very familiar to you now in English, and you can even read and find out that Georgian wine expert had a great year last year. Sorry, I'm still having a hard time with this clicker. I apologize. So communication is a big one for us. We want people to be able to communicate with people where they don't have a common language, wherever they are, whenever they are. And for that, we have a very nice Android app. We have an iOS app. So I guess many of you have been in the situation where you're in the country and you can't really read the signs, or you want to order some food and you're concerned that you might be ordering something that you may not necessarily want to try, or maybe you're allergic. So our app will allow you to translate the text. You can kind of take a picture and see what it says. You can also speak. We have a conversation mode, and you can communicate with people who don't speak English or don't speak your language. So it comes very handy then. You can also download an offline package, and basically when you travel, you don't need to worry about data roaming. It's very expensive, as you may know. And being in the US, we have, especially in California or other states, we have people from all over the world who do not necessarily speak English. So this article talks about an driver who had a medical emergency, and police was able to communicate and get medical help to this person through Google Translate app. Another nice story, an orphan Chinese girl was adopted by the family in the US, and the family has been communicating with the girl through Google Translate. I think by now her English is probably much better than her Chinese, just judging by my own kids who turned to English very quickly. But at that particular point, it was a really life-saving experience for them, life-changing experience for them to be able to talk to their new daughter. So another interesting use case is learning a new language, or just, for many of us probably in the room are probably bilingual, and I do this myself. I go and check myself, or I want to understand what's the better term for this in English or in any other language, and Google Translate really helps me there. We hear a lot of feedback from Google Translate users that they love using Google Translate to help them with homework. We really don't want them to cheat, but it's up to them. But my bigger concern is that they may be failing their language test sometimes. Hopefully not, but in any case, there is a lot of love and support from school or university students who study foreign languages. Some numbers. As I mentioned earlier, we like to operate at scale. So per day, we get over 1 billion translations requests from our users, which means that it's way more than 1 billion words, because people, as you guys just talked about, you translate the whole web pages, and we count it as a translation request. It corresponds to 1 million books being translated per day. It's a humongous scale. And not surprisingly, we get 92% of our users from outside of the US. We currently support 80 languages. We're working to add more languages. Our goal is 100. Arne back there is the one to talk to if you're willing or you're interested in us supporting more languages. And if you speak a language that we don't support yet, we might be able to leverage your help and maybe launch it later. We we're present on different platforms. We talked about Google Chrome, mobile apps, obviously our desktop application, and our Android app is very popular. So how does it actually work? Imagine, so this is our web app. You put, you find a sentence in Bengali, and you put it in, and we generate a language is not just enough. So I don't speak any Bengali, and it may not be 100% proper English translation, but I can understand what this is talking about, the sentence is about. Does anyone in the audience speak Bengali? No. OK. So it'll be an easier, maybe not an easy one, but let's see. So this is the input from the user. And what we do with it, we separate it, we segment it into small segments, tokens, that we can then translate. So we start looking into our phrase table and see, have we seen these words or these segments before in the training data that we talked about earlier in our parallel documents? How would we translate each and every segment here? And we start translating every phrase. So you see this fourth phrase, we translated, we find different variations, right? Like in the dictionary, you would find, it can have different meanings. So we find enough, sufficient, adequate. OK, those kind of like in the same spectrum. And then we go next, and we see, OK, so this token we translate is not 9 and lighting. And that kind of doesn't make sense. Where did 9 come from? Why is there lighting? So hopefully, we're going to trust that our machine translation will think that the first one is actually the best translation. But imagine the situation if we chose 9 or lighting. Then in the end, the whole translation will probably make no sense. And why we got this 9 and lighting there, I'm not exactly sure. It could be that the data was noisy, we didn't properly align it, or the 9 was next to is not 9, something like that could have happened.
Because 9 is no in German?
Say it again?
9. 9, yeah.
9. We have a German speaker. 9 is no. With a different spelling. No, it's probably, I would think it's unrelated, but you never know. It could be, right? It could be homonym. It could be homonym, and sometimes you'll see kind of the funny mistakes that we make from that. I did click. I don't know what happened. Oh, hold on. Was it? OK, sorry. So we keep going, and we generate translations for each and every token there. Next, we look into the word order. And English is a subject-verb-object language, as you know. And we can't just translate these individual tokens. We need to make sure that we generate a translation that sounds properly in English. And so you can see that our system will try to kind of move these tokens around and generate a translation in the right word order. We call it reordering. And last but not least, we will generate all those variants, and this is our algorithm that will calculate our probabilistic model and say, OK, it seems like the top translation is the best one to show to the user. And this is the one that we're going to pick and show to the user. So actually, a language is not just enough. So as far as I know, the full, proper, correct translation, one language is never enough. So I think we actually did a pretty good job on this one. Are there any other questions here? Yes?
Could you say one sentence or two about how you score?
How we score. How we score.
I can speak louder.
All
All right. The question was how you do the scoring. You showed the scoring for the different candidates.
Yeah, I can take this. So there's actually a bunch of models that go into the scoring. First of all, we look into how well these different translation options, how well we think they are at good translations. The other thing is that we look at, when we do the reordering, we have different models on how things should be reordered. And so each of these individual models is attached, has a score attached. And then we have some sort of model in the end that goes over the target language sentence and tells us, oh wait, how well does that correspond to an English sentence? And so we combine all these different scores by weighted averaging, and we optimize the weights a little bit. And so then all these together give us a score.
Okay, so I'm going to move on then to our next bigger topic, which is crowdsourcing. So why did we decide to do crowdsourcing? Obviously, we have an engineering team who's working hard on improving our algorithms. And it's great, as you guys have probably seen, we've improved over years tremendously. And we keep improving all the time. But we thought maybe there is something else we can do to really improve on very simple content. So a lot of our training data comes from news, from different web pages, as we talked about, from subtitles. But sometimes we don't do well on very simple things like where do you come from, or what is your name, or what time is it now. We will translate it quite literally. So can we do something? And one of the reasons might be that we just don't have it in our training data. Users want to translate some kind of slangy internet terminology, whatever they use in chat and text messages. And we don't have it in our training data. We either don't translate it or generate some poor translations. So we thought, OK, we have a lot of users, and they're all passionate, multilingual, and they want us to improve translations. So why don't we leverage them? And we know there are other, obviously, they're outside of Google. There are lots of crowdsourcing companies, as you all know, who are quite successful. And within Google, we also have the volunteer crowdsourcing platforms. You may know MapMaker, where people map their local communities. There is now Waze, which is the traffic aggregator from the community. We have reCAPTCHA, where you basically, it's not just protecting the websites, but it allows us to generate information from and extract information from images. So we actually have had crowdsourcing in our product for quite some time. And I think someone mentioned that already. But do people know, is there anyone who don't know that we have alternative translations when you mouse over the translation today? Everyone knows, you guys know, have seen that, right? So when we generate a translation and you mouse over it, click on it, you will see a drop-down with the alternatives. And so these are those alternatives that we saw in the Bengali example, right? These are the other possible translation, or these are the translations that our system thinks could be a fit for this particular segment. And so for quite some time, we've been, users were able to just click on one of those and select it instead of the one that we are generating. So unfortunately, today, we're still not translating happy birthday to you from English into Dutch. That's a real example. We're going to work on that. If it's spelled in all caps. If it's not spelled in all caps, we're good. If it is in all caps, for whatever reason, we're not translating it. You as a user have an ability to just go in and either click this pencil icon or just say improve this translation and generate a translation that's the correct translation and contribute it to us. We are going to look into those translations and corrections and try to find the good ones. It could be a tricky task because sometimes people will input something that is not necessarily a translation or not a good translation or a really bad translation. Sometimes we will see corrections that are kind of preferential. So people will say, how are you, or what is your name? Depending on the language, it could be female version or a male version, or it could be different, what's it called? The you. Sorry, I'm losing my. Yes, exactly. So we will try to select the good translations and feed them back into our system and make sure that we learn from those. So today, when you generate a correction, you will see, the thank you for doing this. The system will not automatically use your translation. Some people kind of say, well, I just corrected it. Why do you keep translating it incorrectly? Because we need some time to make sure and validate the translation and make sure that we're not showing something that's completely inappropriate or just wrong. How we're validating them? So there are some automatic ways of doing that. At least like the first pass, we can see, is there any spam in there? Is it in the right language? And do all of these things. The other thing is, if people are constantly correcting happy birthday to you to what it should be in Dutch, and we get it from different users and it's the same correction over and over again, we're going to trust that our users are correct, right? We could trust. We could also, so I'm going to go more into this, where we're not sure what do we do with those. So these were in-product corrections, kind of like you basically help us while using the product. But we thought, okay, so what do we do if the language is not launched yet, for example, and you can really help us in the product? Does anyone speak Maori here? No. Okay, so we had very active group of volunteers for Maori, or that was led by actually one person who was very active, but he brought a whole group of volunteers to us who organized this effort to help us launch Maori. And it is an endangered language, and I guess Craig will talk more about this in one of his talks. No, oh, I know, maybe. So basically, we built a platform where people who are passionate about their language, about languages in general that they speak, can come and help us, whether it is to improve their language or for us to help launch a new language. And we called it Translate Community. So Translate Community is the platform where you can help us by contributing to different types of projects. So we ask users to translate, to rate, validate, match. There are all sorts of different projects that we can put out there and really use the help from contributors. And so to your question, how we validate this, so we can then take those corrections and ask others to tell us, are these correct or are these wrong, right? And so if 5 or 10 people are telling us, yes, this is a good translation, then it's a signal for us that we can trust it. It is essentially, right?
How big is it?
So community currently, we're doing a very low promo right now. And I think we're getting tens of thousands of contributions per day. So let me see if it's in the, it depends, right? So we had a Sinhala week in Sri Lanka. People organized the Google Translate week. And there were I believe a couple of thousand people who formed themselves into a community. And they provided, I believe, over 200,000 translations, ratings, validations to us. So what can you do in community? You can translate a very simple phrase, it's okay. Again, because it's spelled O-K-E-Y, we're not translating it correctly, but if Spanish speakers come in and translate it for us, we're happy. We'll fix it. We'll fix our incorrect translation. So this is what validation looks like. It's a very simple thing. We just show you English, we show you Russian, and we ask you to tell us, is it correct or not? Sometimes it's hard to both translate and validate because there is no context. And I hear a lot of feedback from people saying, tell me what this means, and then I can translate. Well, unfortunately, I can't tell them what this means because this is exactly how users use translate, right? They don't tell us what they meant. They just enter something, and they expect us to generate a good translation. So basically, contributors have to come up with their best guess, the same way as machine translation works. We come up with our best guess. Sometimes it's not the best, but that's a guess. Sorry. We also ask community to rate our translations. We want to know how we're doing. If, say, for certain language, we see longer sentences are terrible, terrible, terrible. So then it's a signal for us to look into why is this happening? Are we not doing segmentation correctly? Is there something wrong with the way encoding works, or all those steps that you saw described in Bengali example? Something can go wrong, and we want to know. Something might be perfect, and then we're like, okay, well, so for short content, we are awesome for German, for example. And then we're going to focus on something else. So that's a way for us to measure how we're doing. So as I said, we're kind of just starting to grow our communities. We're hoping to really get more engagement there, to have people form their communities, especially if it's for smaller languages. Actually, I have a picture here. This is the government of the Republic of Kazakhstan yesterday. It's hard to see it. It says Google. On the news, I think it was all over the news. They really want us to launch their language. We also want to launch it. And they're basically asking their country to help Google Translate contribute. And I've seen a huge spike in contribution for Kazakh since yesterday. And as I said, we had Sinhala week. This is our image, how we're planning to grow our community. We know we need to work on improving access or improving our user interface and mobile interface, because it's probably the task or kind of time killer kind of thing. And it also, as a contributor myself, I found that it also helps me learn the language sometimes, because I need to do some research and figure out, I did not know, especially it's some slangy modern word, like exactly how do we say that in Russian? So it helps me improve my English. And with that, I'm going to open it to questions.
With a mic, please.
Yes. So you showed us how some translations can get a consensus and they get considered correct. Does the system automatically assign different credibilities to the volunteers depending on whether their opinion gets upheld or rebuked?
Yes. So we have actually a representative of the team who helps us. Right there. Yeah.
Would you like me to explain that? Or?
Okay, well,
I can answer it.
Okay.
Okay, so it's a multi-step process. Right now, we're primarily building a trust system based off of the agreement rate between users giving answers. Ultimately, we should be, when someone enters a translation or a user correction, that needs to go to a rating or a validation task and needs to morph into a validation task. And when users validate, if they're all approved and validated, that should increase the trust score of the user that submitted the translation or the user correction. We're working on exactly what that transition pipeline is. And also, part of the thing that we want to make sure that we do correctly is not expose nasty content to our raters. So we're a little bit hesitant on making that immediate connection. But eventually, we'll have this full system where you make a correction or a translation, somehow the user sees it, approves it, or rejects it. That changes your trust score. Ultimately, such that if you start entering crap, like if I enter a bunch of crap because I only speak English, but I have to unit test the thing. So I just type in random translations to make sure things work. And ultimately, my submissions should just be dropped and ignored and rejected immediately. Whereas, say, when Sveta is working with English to Russian, her submissions should be automatically approved after other users have vetted her quality. Also, we want to, at some point, move to a point where if we know someone, like say we personally know them and we've asked them to contribute, so such as a Google country engineering consultant, we want to immediately go into the system and say, they're like a top-level rater. They're someone that we really trust. Whatever they do, trust it. And that also primes the system that they can go around, play with the system, rate people, add things based on other people's interactions with their answers and agreement rates. That'll set other people's trust scores.
I'm a user of Google API also, the Translate API, and also the prediction. So I was very happy that it was part of the Google Cloud Platform, so it's part of the core products, but I haven't seen much improvement. For example, one thing is that, sorry?
That's an active project of mine personally.
Right. So I mean, one thing
we like to see better.
Yeah. So one thing, for example, which would be very useful to use Google Translate API as a commercial MT is that if we can just feed in the terminology that we have, right? Everyone who is sitting in this room and they've done translation, they have a terminology database, right? So if I can feed in my terminology, then that alternative translation that you have can be selected according to that terminology, right? And the other thing that I have is that this percentage of alternative translation, you don't offer it in the API.
I can talk about both of those things. So the first thing you're talking about is customization. We do actually support this, but it's being transitioned into another, it's being implemented in a totally different way that's more sustainable and also that we can keep it from dying. So I can't really say like what's going to happen next and when it'll officially be part of the API. But what happens right now is if you run a website, you can go to a particular part of Google Translator Toolkit and say you own this website, and you can manually add in phrase translations and say, duck should be translated to this particular phrase in French. Yeah. So we're working on fixing that. That's something we're actively thinking about, and I believe we're figuring out how to make it part of the API, such there's a programmatic way of doing this. On the second topic, exposing the additional data, the data we show on our front end and on our mobile platforms, I have been actively working on restructuring our code base so that doing this is easier. Previously, it was very difficult just based off of the craft and internal code and bad code health. But I've been restructuring things so that very soon, I anticipate making a switch to a more expanded API where you have more features. When we do that, we want to figure out how that changes the pricing scheme or what that does. But this is all things that are in my head. And I just need to talk to people and do the work. So I don't know when, but someday before, I don't know, 2020. Question over here.
So the users who are contributors, do they need to log in and become members of the community in order to contribute, and that's how you keep tab of them, or how do you do it?
Yes, so the only thing you need to do is you need to log in with your Google account. There is no other sign up or anything like that. It's just your regular, if you have Gmail, this is your account.
I have a question about privacy. Are you storing everything, every single query, every single translation request? And is there a way to not have it stored? I'm assuming that a lot of people, actually I'm not assuming, I've seen that. A lot of people are translating stuff that really should not be out in the public and definitely shouldn't be stored.
Do you want to take? Okay.
So there's a lot of different things that are logged in a lot of different ways. If you are a signed-in user, this goes into our and this is generic to all things that happen in Google. It goes into our log storage system that is keyed by your Gaia account, what we call it your Gaia account, basically your Gmail address. However, typical engineers can't see that. I personally cannot go and look. What we do periodically is we look at, for a large time span, say a month, 2 months, we'll aggregate all the queries, and then we'll export, say, queries that came from 50 different users. or that happened 50 unique times over the time period, so that we have an idea of what's frequent and what's common. And that generally represents what people are generally trying to do, and it filters out anything that's private and personal. So we try to take many precautions to make sure we don't see anything that is personal or private. And if you're translating any web pages, we actually don't store what content. We only store the URL.
Only short queries.
Also, yeah, well, for some things we export short queries, and that's what's going into Translate Community. Things that are under, say, 10 words or 15 words, and that's what we show to Translate Community. And we have really hard filters. It has to happen many thousands of times to be put into that list. And we also internally review it, scan it, make sure it's not offensive or exposing what we call private, personally identifiable information. We filter all of that out. The other thing for Translate Community, that we do explicitly store attached to the user's account, and we make that very visible. We say this is being attached to your account, and it's considered a contribution. It's not your query, so please be very cautious about entering anything you would consider private, because that is something that we want to build as a translation database for ourselves. And it's not quite user data, and we try to be very clear with users with that, and we can always be better. So hopefully that answers most of your questions.
I sometimes translate your beautiful in multiple languages. I hope you are not you miss it. By the way, my question is about the volunteers. Do you have any specific plans to promote more users to join the evaluation? I remember that once Google asked its users to annotate images with the words, and in that case, you are. I remember that you are giving some kind of a reward and kind of a game. So, do you have any? If you have any plans to do that in this project, please tell me.
Definitely. So we also plan on, as I said, currently our promotion is this really small butter bar, yellow bar.
It's really ugly.
That we're showing to just some percentage of our logged in users. So we can do much higher and much more beautiful promotion. We are starting slow because we also don't want to overwhelm ourselves with the amount of data we will be getting, hopefully. And yes, we are considering some reward mechanisms, and we're also considering making it more engaging and maybe more like competitions. You might see leaderboards. We're not fully, we haven't fully designed it yet, but that's the plan, definitely. More engagement.
Hi. So how large is your source content?
You mean for translation?
Right. For the community translation, how many words?
Oh, you mean each entry?
No, total volume.
Do you mean how much English content are we pushing through Translate Community?
That's correct.
I'm not sure we can totally share that. It's not right now from English to other languages. It's not huge. We have ambitions of making it very large.
So I guess my question is, what is it that the community is translating? Because when you look at the Google page, it's just the word Google and how lucky do you feel or something like that, right? But then.
So you're asking what content we are asking users to translate,
right?
So there is a combination of different types of content. So some things, as I showed on my slide, very simple phrases, something that we know our users will appreciate if it's translated correctly. Things like where do you come from, what's your name, some song names, some popular content that's being searched on the web or being translated. For example, our big use case is menu items, right? So people going in the restaurants and translating menu items when you're ordering some food. So we can put, and we have actually put some of those food names and menu items, and we ask people to translate, because those are tricky for machine translation. Sometimes it's some kind of fancy name, and it could be kind of Frenchy English, and who knows. So we ask users to contribute to those to make sure that we translate those correctly.
So it's not just Google data, but it's basically user-generated or worldwide data that you have? Is that just, it's not just the Google UI or help pages?
Oh, no. It's not localization content. No.
Okay.
The shortest description is that it's content that we know our users want translated well. On Translate the interface, not the user interface.
So I have a question. I'm wondering, when is the timing point that you decide to launch the new languages? What kind of quality expectation that you have that it needs to be reached?
So we have multiple internal quality measures that we use. There is some automatic measures that are used in the general machine translation community that basically work by comparing the system output against the human generated reference. And so the closer we get to the human reference, the higher the score of the quality measure is. And so we have like an internal bar of like how high we want that quality to be. And then as additional measure, we also have, we look at subjective scores. So either by showing it to our users in the community or by having language experts looking at it, we have a rating system that we use to score the translations. And we also like do some overall system review to make sure that like we actually translate enough of the content and we have like good coverage of what users actually translate. And once we've met all these bars, there's also like some more technical things that the timing needs to be right to launch the languages.
And maybe I can add to that. So we also need to have a certain, not necessarily a large amount of parallel data in our system compared to other languages, but for some languages, if it's mostly a spoken language and there is not enough data on the translations on the web for a given language, we may not be able to launch it because we need to learn from those existing translations.
Hi. The confidence score you spoke of, is that something that you do or plan to expose to the users?
The score that I spoke of was we need some reference for that. So we need some human translation to compare it against. Whenever we don't really know what the right answer would be. So that specific score we can't expose to the users. There are other measures that work without the reference and that sort of can be exposed to the user in telling him, okay, we're sure about this translation or we're not so sure. We've experimented with that and we haven't found a good measure that we think is really adds enough value, but we're continuously every once in a while looking into that if you can find something. But so far we haven't found anything that would solve that.
And I can add to that, I think the score itself, if we showed you the score that our system generates, it won't tell you anything, right? Like I can't interpret those scores myself. But the ranking in those alternative translations, the way they're ranked is basically kind of the score, right? We're telling you we think, our system thinks this is the best translation, and then it goes kind of down the list. So that's a way of stack ranking them.
I have another question. If I remember correctly, the Google Translate is integrated with the localization Teams app, whatever you're using.
Their toolkit.
Yeah. Are you also using their human output to train your machine translation engine?
That's one of the, yes, the TMs from localization team. Yes, I believe that's one of our data sources.
So as much as we all love Google Translate, I'm sure there's much skepticism about it. I've had translators who turned down requests to edit not Google Translate, sorry, machine translation. And I've also had a professor in translation who would say, like, machine translation replacing human translation is never going to happen. So what is the ultimate goal that you see Google Translation, and how do you plan to get there, and how do you improve it?
So do you want, or do you want? I can start, and we can all give our own answer. So I think our main goal, and we talked about this earlier, is to make information available in all the languages. And we're not there yet to say that this is the correct translation, right? So this is our main mission, is to enable understanding of the data on the web that you find on the web, and is to enable communication between people. And it's not the translation that you are talking about, right? Like replacing machine translation. We're not using it for translating medical documentation or anything like that. So to go back to your question about post-editing machine translation, I think it really depends actually on the language. So for some of our top languages, we know, and we've heard from our API users, that it really helps, and it makes translators more efficient. Now, when you go down the list of languages where we're not performing as great, then yes, it becomes kind of a waste of time, or it actually distracts translators. So our hope is to keep helping translators be more efficient and improving the machine translation so that it actually helps.
I think the other thing that I would add to this is that some of the things that I know human translators do well are making use of information that our computers fundamentally don't have access to. So they have access to like the visual space, the mental space, a memory space, a cultural space that our computers just can't encode, because we primarily are based on what's written down in books or on the internet or is transcribed from speech. But it really has no understanding of reality or common knowledge or anything like that. So certain things like idioms or small catchphrases, we fundamentally have a really hard time doing that, because unless some human wrote it down in one language and wrote down the corresponding idiom in another language, we just won't pick that up, because it's statistical noise, and we would not have the common knowledge to get that point. So that's something we're really not putting we're not going to put effort towards that in a very long time. We really want to make sure that basic information is conveyed accurately, that grammar is approximately represented, and that someone using it can communicate in an effective and safe way and understand basic information. So there's lots of room for translators to do plenty of things that we are just not going to care about for a very long time.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point where we're more for the situation where there's no translator. You're sitting by yourself in a restaurant in Tokyo. There's only a Japanese menu. You have no clue what you're ordering. Nobody understands English. So what you're going to do? So these are the places where we come in. Or you don't want to pay a translator to translate a random web page that you're looking at. And I mean, even the translator probably wouldn't want to translate it anyway. So these are the places where we come in.
Yes, hi. I wanted to know how you actually select the sources for the alignment. Like, so how do you select them? Like, can you trust them? And also, do the authors of these pages know about it? Like, do you take into consideration intellectual property and all that?
So, well, I can talk about that. Whatever is available publicly on the web, it's being crawled by Google, and you know, it's public on the web. So the owner of the content made it available publicly, right? So if the owner doesn't want to make it public, there is robots.txt, and they can make it invisible to Google. So basically, it's kind of a fair game. Whatever is out there is what we can use.
So I have to say that, I mean, we adhere to the fair use policies, so we don't take exactly the content. It's always that when we find content, it's aggregated across many pages, and we don't take like full translations and serve them back to users, but we really chop it up and take single word translations that occur many times on the web. Because even, as you said, that's back to your other part of the question, can we trust what's out there? And no. we can't. So there's a lot of reasons why that is. I mean, first of all, there's a lot of bad content out there that's just not very well translated. A lot of machine translated content is out there that we don't want to use. So what we have to rely on is that we do this aggregation, and just by having many people use it in the same way, we have more trust, at least, that the things we learn are correct.
Hi. In previous page, I think there's a translation to English to Korean.
Yes.
I think the words are missing out there. As a Korean, I can understand it, but it's really kind of rude if you ask to Koreans something like that. If only Koreans happening this, or any
can
other
I
languages.
just talk to you in person about this?
Yeah.
Given the little knowledge I have of Korean, is it because it's missing inflections of politeness?
Yeah.
Okay, so it just dropped out the politeness aspects.
Not really, but.
Okay, I just want to know, like, why is it bad? Is it missing a word that makes it polite, or is there just an offensive word in there?
But there's no translation about your, and there's no translation about what is.
Okay, cool.
It's missing.
So.
Yeah, I can say in Korean, but you don't understand.
Can you translate it what Korean says into English?
Maybe your means 당신의, but there's no 당신의.
Okay.
And what is there's 무엇입니까, but there's no 무엇입니까. So yeah, so there's missing. So is it happen Koreans or other languages normally happen to this?
So where this particular question came from, this comes from a lot of different sources. Some of this comes from.
This is machine translation. This is rating.
I was going to be more vague than that. Okay, so since that cat out of that, what we do is we come up with a lot of different translation models. Sometimes it's the current system, and we want to know how good are we doing. So this four-star rating gives us a very accurate view of, for English to Korean, are we like mostly human quality? Are we like kind of at the bottom of the barrel? Is it in between? What's going on? We also do a number of experiments. So say, for instance, in the next 6 months, a team wants to work on fixing Korean translations, and they want to fix this missing word problem. They could go do some machine learning or do some specific algorithms, come up with a B model, like a test model, compare it to an A model, do A/B testing. So you would see maybe one version and another version, and ideally their improvement would show better scorings. So with this particular task, we want to find ways to make it easier to say exactly what's wrong, but because we're focusing on very simple tasks, we want a user to just look at it, say, yeah, that kind of sucks. Click that it sucks, and then submit it. And then we'll go and turn it into another task where maybe you can do error analysis and say, well, why does it suck? Is it missing a word? Is it just offensive? Is it just the wrong language?
But I jumped in to say that this was not community generated. That's what I meant.
Right. But at some point it will be community generated.
But it's not excellent, actually.
This was me clicking the button. I do not speak Korean, so I just clicked the button.
This is what I do all the time. So we have a question right here.
So one thing I was wondering about was when you're collecting all the data, some data sources tend to be kind of, I guess the formality tends to vary depending on the data source. So a news data source may provide very good grammar. Twitter, ICANN has cheeseburger. They shorten everything a little bit too much. Some other data source may actually have good grammar, bad grammar, mixture of languages. How do you filter that? How do you choose the right translation?
Yeah. You probably know more about that than I do.
This is a hard problem. I mean, even just determining if something is good or not, and if what the formality level is, and what we should take, it's a very hard problem even for humans to sort through that data. At least I feel for the languages I understand, and we currently don't have a good way of incorporating this. It's a feature often people ask for when they produce translations, that, oh, I want to have this in a formal way, or I want to have this in an informal way. But currently there's no, or we don't have a good way of dealing with these diversity. And so what happens is just, since we aggregate over all this, you'll see a little bit of all of it.
Yeah, hi. Maybe it's already spoken, but the question is, what is necessary or what is required to start translation service for new language? Of course, translation, word-level translation table is always required, and a language specialist is always required to input some kind of language rules. What is required to start new service?
So, well, I can start and you can. Are you talking about, do you have a particular language in mind? Yeah. What language is it?
Not particular,
but
starting,
So if we're not supporting a language yet, how do we add a new language to Google Translate? So we basically, one and first and big requirement is that we need to be able to find a lot of parallel texts, right? Sometimes people come to us and they kind of beg us, I really want to preserve this language, or this is the language I speak at home. But if it's just a spoken language, or if it's a language that is not popular on the web and we don't find enough parallel data, basically we may not be able to build a translation model for that language. Now, if it's a language that has a relatively good internet presence, then we start, so Arne and team, we start looking into what data we collected, what can we generate, and we start evaluating how is our system working for that particular language. We may need to do some tweaks, again, depending on the language. It could be, do we need some special segmentation for this language? Is encoding correctly? For some languages, we need to do some normalization and do some tweaks. So then usually, especially with the, we talk about kind of long tail languages that are not very prominent on the web, and we don't speak those languages, and they're not similar to any of the languages that we speak, we'll probably need some consultant person or some volunteer, as was the case with Maori language, where we actually could not hire any translators because I guess they don't, well, they exist, but there's only a handful of them. So we had people who speak the language consult us to see, like with Korean example, you were saying, so it seems like we are dropping this word. And so we would, if someone will point out to us, there is a consistent issue that you are mistranslating something or you're dropping something, we'll see what we can do to fix that. And then it goes through all the evaluation rounds. And then when we feel comfortable that the language is far from perfect, far from our top languages, but at least it's helpful for people who speak the language or want to translate into that language, then we launch it.
Just quick for from the technical side. So the program itself, it's pretty much the same all the time. So it runs the same code on all languages. So what we need is, one thing that I mentioned earlier is we have like one human translation to do automatic evaluation. So it's all very evaluation driven and very iterative. So try to improve the system, evaluate again, try to improve the system, evaluate again, see what works. And so on what we need to change for each language is mostly, as Svetlana said, just find the right parallel data and put it in the system in the right way.
So if it's not parallel data you have, the volunteer usual speaker or native speaker can evaluate that. So specialist is not always necessary.
No.
It depends, yeah, but we most of the time we only require the specialist at the very late stages just to make sure that everything is okay.
Yeah.
Svetlana, could you go back to the Bengali example in the slide deck?
I don't know which one.
So you said that, I mean, if you look at it, there is really a lot of possibilities how we could actually put all those tags together. And so do you base, and you said, well, for English, we would just go back to grammar, so we know it's a subject, verb, object language. How sophisticated are those grammar rules? Could you comment on that?
I'm not a linguist, so I don't know how sophisticated they are. I kind of understand what's happening. It really depends on the language. Sometimes we know what we have to do when we know the language behaves in a certain way. Sometimes we have automatic methods that learn how they have to move words around. So we try to keep the manual intervention in these cases minimal. And so I wouldn't call these rules sophisticated.
No. Because it could be TMs and just based on statistical analysis, right? So why you need to do all this analysis, plenty of queries and so on, when you just could find the match, the pair, and it's faster. You just request TM and that's it. You get the whole thing. Perfect translation. Instead guessing which word, what first, what second.
Some of that. So we don't. When you say TM, you're referring to translation memories, right?
Yes.
Or something like that.
And also, yes, the whole concept could be unit. It just depends how you divide, and then you just how frequency it is in your corpus, right?
Yeah. So we can't. If we find it in like the web and we find a parallel translation in the web, we can't really use that because that does break fair use, which is why we depend on aggregate. So we explicitly put a lot of effort to split things up when we're getting training data and we're putting it into the training system. What we are starting to do is with community submissions, because we're communicating very clearly that we will make these translations that people submit and apply them to make Google Translation better, we can actually serve instant translations through a direct system similar to a translation memory, but it's fed by what our community is doing or what professional translators when we buy the translation. So if someone types this exact phrase and we have it in our short text translation system, we can serve it directly. And we're doing that for the most frequent queries. This query, unfortunately, is not very frequent. I pulled this out of a generic phrase thing for a bunch of languages. But what we do is when we have this big thing called a beam search algorithm that is picking a couple of words at a time, computing probabilities and likelihoods, and then searching the space a little bit, and then it doesn't search too much. It won't actually do the full combination of every single possibility, but it'll pick some, think like, oh, this is pretty good, then it'll extend it a little bit, maybe back up and look a little bit more in the space and consider some different possibilities. So we cut out a lot of the search space by just approximating and doing some heuristic search analysis, and that saves us a lot of time and allows it to be really fast. But yeah, we can't quite use translation memories of what we pull out of our training data explicitly.
And to add to that, imagine this Georgian page, right? There's no TM that will help us translate this entire page exactly, right? Because we need to chop it into small.
And after that, you improve and increase your TM. So, and also in some areas, you just find the pair and just from the first. So you could build huge TM.
In search, we don't have things longer than maybe like 3 or 4 words, just explicitly. But we do have multiple size phrases. It's not necessarily word to word. So say New York City, that will probably be something in our phrase table, and it'll map to the transliterated version of New York City in Cyrillic, perhaps, or some other language. Or for Japanese, how you write it in here, katakana, we'll have that exactly in the phrase table. And we do that for what we call lexicalized phrase, or what I refer to as lexicalized phrases, things that basically become a word, but they're multi-word phrases. But we don't really go beyond that. That's the longest of where we'll do an exact match. But this is a good thought, but yeah, there's a limitation. Okay, yeah. Now let's actually let you ask your question because we've been taking the mic.
Sorry. My question was, why you don't use context or profile? I mean, it's technical, it's news, it's literature, and something like that, because when you can select from the drop-down box, and this is pretty common for all MT engines. And this is how you improve, because let's say switch, right? It could be a physical device, and it could be just switch when you for lights. So how you translate, and in another language, it's two different words. What's your guess? And when you select, let's say, it's technical documentation, right? So you know what's the best.
I think we're just not there yet. It might come.
So the way we put it in like the natural language processing is this is the word sense disambiguation problem. We're given English what is like the different meaning and what is the meaning given the context. We've done some research on explicitly doing word sense disambiguation and say like for switch, we would say this is switch version 2, which corresponds to the technical interpretation of this particular thing. And then we put it into the translation model, generate the Swedish version of switch version 2, whatever that word corresponds to. And doing this explicitly, we haven't found improvement. We find that for the most part, we actually figure out those word senses correctly. The problem is a bias in our data. So we had a problem, I think, like a year ago where we were looking at the word disk. Like someone was like, please hand me the disk. And when it was translated into Japanese, there was like some particular, I think it was like the like hard disk interpretation. We were always using that when it was like, hand me the Frisbee is what they were really trying to say. And that this happens because on the internet, more people write about hard disks than Frisbees. So just the data corresponds to that view of English and Japanese versus the Frisbee sense. So it's really it's a training data problem in that we don't have that actual version with enough significance. Not really. There's models that do that inside Google, but yeah, we don't really use it.
Okay.
There's one exception, though. For patent translation, we have a cooperation with the EPO where we actually do specifically work with them to make better translations on patents.
I know. Sorry about that. I am interested in knowing how are you training your engine? Are you training it in a way that it will anticipate the query? Are you training in a way that it will learn from the mistakes? No? Are you planning to do that at some point?
No. There's multiple long answers, I guess. So the first thing was, I remember the last thing was, do we learn from mistakes? What was the first thing? The queries. I mean,
learning
well,
from
what you're doing is sort of like going into that direction. So we're starting to do more of that now when we try to learn from user corrections. But in general, since we learn from the data that we find on the web, there's not much we can do about that data that we find there. So we have to work with that and can't really change that. And the only thing we can do is improve the system a little bit from what users give us back. And that's what you've just seen in examples with the community and with the user corrections.
About the quality or accuracy of translation, is it totally depending on the amount of the document? But I feel the gap of the two languages are quite different from language to language. What kind of aspect is influenced to the accuracy of translation?
Okay, the question is what makes some systems for some languages better than for other systems, for other languages, or like what makes it quality difference? Okay, so there's multiple things that we have to consider when looking at quality. One thing is what you mentioned, like training data. How much training data do we have, and how well does the training data match what we're trying to translate, or what you are trying to translate? So that's one important factor. The other factor is that sometimes some languages are just harder for the MT system. There might be multiple reasons for that. One is very different word order that makes it hard for the system to pick the right translation. There's other things like morphology that make it hard, especially when you translate from English into morphologically rich language. And without context, sometimes you just don't know what you need to do. And so we make a lot of errors there. And there's other features of languages that make it hard. And it also depends on the sort of the pair of languages that you're considering. And yeah. And the amount of data. Sorry, I mean you've been asking for a long time.
I was wondering, just conceptually, when you get feedback on a translation, either as a rating, but maybe merely user feedback, how do you incorporate that back into the system? Because you're based on statistical data, millions and millions of words. So how many times does somebody have to correct something to actually make a difference? Do you use overrides? Do you?
Yeah. So we basically, like we have the trust score for our translations. You saw. So we can say the data. This is the data where we are very confident. 5, 10, 15 different users translated it the exact same way, and we believe that these are good users. So we can just give it a very high trust to this data and kind of override machine translation. Right.
So what can happen is, on this English to Dutch translation of Happy Birthday, if you submit the translation, then we'll go make sure it's not like something we shouldn't show to users, that it's like reasonable looking, show it to community users. And right now we're just using like a randomly picked number of 5, but one day that'll be a different number. Once 5 users that we trust say it's good, then that submission, that user correction, can go into our short text translation system and kind of sidestep the machine translation efforts and actually be served directly. And that's sort of an instant cycle pipeline that we're trying to get to, such that this happens within like a day or 2. Right now, it's sort of a manual process because a human is sitting in between transitioning things from stage to stage and reviewing everything. But eventually, we want a complete automated system that does this. So that'll be improving things. And then with community translations and also the user corrections, that's just also expanding our corpus of training data so that we now have just more and more samples. Something that we should probably consider is weighting those user corrections when we put it into the training data based on how many people approve of it, and really amplifying it and saying, like, this occurred 5 times because 5 people really agree that it's a good translation. We haven't really played around with that at all, but that's probably something that we should think about.
So you said about helping someone in a foreign country to order food, and I was looking at the Google Translate app on iPhone, and I was wondering, is it possible or like better to have a feature that allows users to simply take a photo and then like translate it? Is it because it's technically?
Be patient. Please just be patient. Yeah, buy it. No, so I use iPhone, and I've been complaining to the mobile developers for like since I joined the team 2 years ago about getting this done, but just wait.
Is it feasible on Nexus?
The answer is that we should do this. The issue is really just headcount and people implementing the iOS version. Android does it already, but we just need people to implement it on iOS, and so it's really just a matter of time. The technology is there.
I work with a company that does it for iOS.
Nice.
Hi. So when we do English to any other language translation, we always consider English as a base language. So now if a user enters, like, let's say, any different language to any different language, so first question is like how correct would be the relevance of the translation? I would say like I always come up like do some mock translations from Google Translate, and I play around with some translations. So I usually find much of the translations not correct, the language which I know. I try to give even like wrong phrases. So how does the machine actually know whether the user has entered a correct grammatical sentence and then giving the relevant translation? And yeah, can you elaborate on that?
So something I know, because I sometimes have to fix these problems, is if you type a English sentence and you say, translate this from Spanish to English, the translate, like, there's no guarantee about what will happen. It'll turn out really bad and really perhaps offensive or just really confusing. And this is because we don't really check that. So if you put in something that's not valid Spanish and you say, call this Spanish and turn it into English, it's really unknown. It's undefined what will happen.
Like, let's say I enter Spanish and I say convert it to like Hindi, or
no, I think there is a different question.
Right? Yeah, that's the second question of.
Okay, how do we go?
How do we go from Spanish to Hindi? Yeah. Do you want to answer that?
No.
Arna?
So it really depends. It really depends on the specific pair. You might have noticed that the quality into and from English is a little bit higher than with other directions. You might also think that we probably don't have 80 times 80 translation systems around. So sometimes we bridge through other languages and lose a little bit of information by that.
Is the English?
No.
Is it the script that you have a standardized script and go by that? No.
That's a dream. To that last part, there's a little bit of research on neural network models of translation. Another team in the brain team, they first started doing this where you take a word, you project it into this giant mathematical space, and then if you do it right, the French version of the English word shows up in the same part of the space, and you just like, hey, where's the French word? You find it, and then you get the French version of the word. This doesn't really work well, but we're trying to figure out how to make it work well. So that's an open research task that a lot of people are thinking about, including us, but the short answer is no. There's no like universal language representation yet.
So my question is kind of related to this series of questions that he's just asked. I know you're basically saying you don't use a meta language, you don't use some perfected meta language between all the other languages to bridge. But what I'm wondering is, so with this probabilistic based model where you just kind of, you're doing this matching based on frequency of use across the two languages, it seems like it's very subjective and could vary based on locale. You could get people kind of ping-ponging back and forth across their favorite translations. And do you have a way of settling that? Like, specifically, do you have a way of users actually correcting syntax, actually saying, okay, these words are these parts of speech. These parts of speech always go in this order. These words always end, you know, a Japanese question with a ka, you know, that sort of thing, so that it's not all just the math, but it is actually some fixed rules that settle a ping pong match.
I don't quite understand the ping pong part, but yeah, there's some aspects of the translation that where we just know that we have to do something about it.
Well,
but it's hard for users to change that.
Yeah, so I guess
Sorry,
users are not...
the ping pong match thing is just that language is very subjective. It's very emotional, and people have their favorites, but it could vary based on region, and not every locale, you know, not every locale is going to be represented in the 80 sets that you have there. So some preferences will bounce back and forth, and I think sometimes there are definitive answers as far as the correct grammar, the correct syntax, and so forth. And I was just wondering, do you map to any of that, or is it all just the probability and the correlation?
Yes, we mostly rely on the probability and correlation, yes.
Well, I think this is the question about user corrections, right? And
so in user corrections, like we don't really make use of, do you want to say that?
No. So, well, So I think this is what I was talking about earlier, that some people will change it to formal and some people will change it back to informal. So how do we know which one should we be using? And unfortunately, we'll probably, in fact, ping pong back and forth. But I think ideally there is also a product solution there to show both of those and say we're pretty confident that this and these translations are correct. And I think we're thinking about how to make it more explicit in our product and show them in a non-confusing way.
And slightly on the grammatical side, we make use of machine learned based parse trees for some languages. So in English, there's been a lot of research on, given an English sentence, how do you build a dependency tree or automatic constituency tree saying this is a verb phrase, noun phrase, et cetera, and there's a determiner, and it always attaches like that. There's a set of researchers building those tools for different languages. We want to figure out how to use that correctly, and we sometimes make use of that. But that's really like as close as we get to saying like this is really how things should look. We don't do anything much harder than that. And there's a mic somewhere.
There have been some creative, unconventional uses of Google Translate shown on the web, presented on the web. Which one is your favorite?
Maybe you can tell us what.
I have my favorite. My favorite is this was a comedic video of someone taking the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. They were like beatboxing and dancing to it, and then they put it through Translate, and they did it from like English to Spanish to English, and it sounded pretty good. And then like English to Spanish to French to English, English, Spanish, French, Chinese, Arabic, English. Like they went through all languages, and at each progression, it just slowly turned into a worse and worse, less like at some point it was just like mom, truck, turn around, I fight. And it was just completely incomprehensible, but they wrapped it very well. That was my favorite. I think that's Arna's favorite too.
I did not include, we had some slides and other presentations where the guy sent us a picture with his wife, and like it was a handwritten letter and a picture attached, and he said that he found love of his life and he was able to communicate with her, and thanks to Google Translate, he's now happily married. And, it's a very cheesy picture we didn't include.
What about competition? Do you keep eye on, your partners or enemies, call it whatever? You are not the only one, right?
You mean by competition? Yeah.
Microsoft Translate.
Right. Do we do what with them?
Well, both, you see. And
so we publish research papers in joint journals, so we sort of know each other doing research-wise. Beyond that?
Well, we do keep track, and I think it's very, at Google, being ahead of other search engine, it's kind of competition is healthy and it's good. It's good when there is competition. Otherwise, it kind of, you relax and you don't improve because you know you're the best. So we periodically look into how we're doing compared to our
So do you do some analysis, let's say, because when you compare, right, it's not like just translation, it's some kind of rules, what they use, they could use whatever algorithm, whatever, So
as far as what they do internally, we only know what they publish in joint research conferences.
Right, but by result you can guess what.
We don't really try.
So don't tease the engines.
We don't reverse engineer what they're doing. At most is we'll just like put in a sentence and be like, did they drop the noun or did we drop the noun?
Hi, I was wondering, have you ever thought about monetizing from Google Translate, or like any premium users for Google Translation or anyway, or do you think just data is enough for Google?
I think API we have.
Well, so we do monetization in a couple ways. We have an API where it's paid. So this individual has to pay to get machine translations out of us in a large-scale way. But what we have also tried doing at some point, we've tried putting ads on the page, I think, at some point in the past, and that didn't work out, and so we killed it. And we also have some feature that I think this was killed, where we will suggest someone advances with whatever they're doing to go to a professional translator. And I think we get like some tiny percentage of what was paid to the professional translator, but this was a long time ago and it was not very well done. Just the whole workflow of doing that was just botched, not necessarily on our part, because we weren't the team doing most of that work. We were just like, here, go to this flow, and someone else was managing that page. But really, no.
Other than API, there's...
Yeah, like we don't really care about monetizing too much.
Charitable.
We just want people to read the internet is our real concern.
Okay, so who's going to ask the last question? You want the final word? Okay, we get 2 more questions.
Okay, so my question is, so getting this improved with the crowdsourcing we just launched, let's call it mission to moon. What's your mission to Mars? Because in the end, you are a corporation. Or is it going to be like, what's the long-term plan here?
Remove language barriers.
Smash language barriers such that you can go to any country with anyone speaking any language and just have a magical device. Like essentially, the Star Trek Universal Translator is our ultimate goal, but that's just 5 years away.
How long do I have to wait for my native language, Burmese? Because Burma is really, I mean, I still call it Burma. We are, up and coming, and a lot of, users, and, internet is like everywhere over there.
So we don't really comment on future releases and when we are going to launch certain features or languages. So just be a little bit more patient.
And help us. I think the more you help us, the more people you bring to help us through community, the sooner it will be. But I think we can say that we are it's one of the languages that we feel positive or confident that we will. It's not one of the languages where we were talking about sometimes it's just we can't launch because there's not enough data. It's definitely on our radar, but we.
And just to be a little more general, Google-wide, we consider Burma to be one of the new emerging markets because other people also consider it a new emerging market, along with Bangladesh, Laos, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. So those 6 countries, Google is taking a much larger interest in and making sure first all of our products are internationalized correctly and they're supported in those countries correctly. So there's a growing group of people that will pressure not only us, but also speech recognition and handwriting and all the other tools to make sure that we get things right. So we care about it. We want to do it right. It needs to hit a particular quality bar, but more and more people are going to be pressuring us to get it right. So just be patient. And I think that was the last question.
I don't know. How badly do you want to ask this question? You.
I know this is the statistical, engine, for the Google. But however, for those minor languages which are hard to get the parallel data, do you consider to introduce rule-based a little bit so that you can improve the quality? Or is it just against the principle?
Well, we're not. Our principle is to make it work. I mean, no matter what. So we're not dogmatic about the approach, but
if we have no data, then there is nothing to apply rules to, right? Kind of basically, essentially.
So another way to look at this: if there is no data out there, who's going to use it?
Well, at least like a hybrid. Like I'm not saying like.
Yeah. I'm not objecting to your method. So for us, also the question is where do we put our resources? And if we don't see anybody using it on the internet, it's a bit harder to justify putting engineering time into that if there's no content to translate.
No, actually, I was thinking. I mean, that's true, but like a Burmese, maybe introducing rule a little bit can fasten up to the market.
Okay. Yeah, certainly that's an interesting thought, and like integrating the some linguistic knowledge and handmade things can certainly help the quality. Yes.
Okay. well, this is clearly a popular topic, and when the last question turns into 4, and this is why we have to have you back. So thank you, and thank you everybody for coming and for adjusting and filling out the room just perfectly. What's that? Did you have a research project? Thank you. You had a research project you wanted to ask for people, for volunteers, or is that somebody else? So here we go.
All right. My name is Anurag. I work closely with the Translate team, and I work on the crowdsourcing platform. And so we're trying to do some research into what motivates people into contributing to try to understand what is it that we offer that kind of drives them to come to the Google community pages and contribute to translations? Or what do people feel about the representation of their language? And we got some idea of that. So how passionately do people feel about it, and how much effort would they like to put in? What do they think of the features that we offer so that they can come in and contribute more translations? So I would love it if you would volunteer some time or some opinions of yours. Just provide your contact information if you have, let's say, half an hour to just talk to us about whatever you know about making translations better, or contributing translations, contributing content about languages that can help make Google Translate better. If you are interested, I would love to get your email address or any contact information. I'll be standing right here, and would love to tell you more about what we are planning to do with this research. Thank you.
If you have more questions, at least I'm going to stay around for a little bit, so you can approach me directly.
We have time if you do, and if you do, and there's still food and so on. So and we don't want to waste the Google food, you know. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Google Translate team.